founders 25 years ago. And I can tell you with great authority that there's no other place like the Stars Institute for Medical Research other than here in Kansas City. And why is that? Because first of all, Jim and Virginia gave us this mission to actually reveal the secrets of life in the hopes that that knowledge will ultimately result in benefits for all of us, trying to address a number of maladies that affect all of us and have been affecting us and our loved ones for generations. So that's a tremendously important goal. But the second thing is that that's great. We'll establish an institute, but how do we make sure that the institute can actually sustain that activity in perpetuity? I think that's where the genius of Jim and Virginia really kicked in, because what they decided to do was to fund the institute through the proceeds and dividends of a for-profit company that you all know as American Century. So the dividends of American Century, a large percentage of their dividends, actually come back to the institute. So our scientists can actually pursue the boldest possible ideas. So we don't have to constantly justify why is it that this esoteric topic we're trying to study needs to be funded. We prefer those studies to become self-evident, such that their importance becomes immediately obvious to everybody. But when you start something that is strange, few people will actually understand why you're doing it. For example, if you were to try to solve, that's fine, it's okay. Really, we've all been there, both as children and parents, so don't worry about it. But the thing is that if you think about it, diseases like Alzheimer's, something that our scientific director, somewhat related work, is caused by proteins, right? But the issue here is that people have been trying to solve this disease for a long time. But we don't know how memories are made. So wouldn't it be better for us to understand how memories are made before we try to fix something that we don't even know how it works? Those are the kinds of questions that the Institute really wants to pursue. We want our scientists to pursue bold ideas, to ask bold questions. And these bold questions, we may not get answers even in our lifetime, but they actually will plant the seeds for other generations of scientists to continue to develop those ideas and ultimately provide us with an answer to these questions. So our institute is very diverse in that situation. We not only study neuroscience, we study developmental biology, cell biology, genomics, genetics, you name it. Anything that our scientists can imagine being a very, very difficult and almost impenetrable question, that's what we're trying to address here at the Institute. So that's a unique place for somebody like me as a scientist to say, yeah, I work at an institute that actually does science. Yeah. It sounds ridiculous, but that's really what it's boiled down to as the discipline of science has evolved. So the reason why I think this is important for us to meet here today is that I believe that the 21st century is the century when biology is going to occupy its proper place at the big table of science. So in the big table of science, you have physics, you have chemistry, and you have mathematics. And biology is always in the kids' table because neither physics, mathematics, nor chemistry can really fully explain biology or life. And biologists have not done a really extraordinary good job trying to figure out how this works. But I think this is the century when we're really going to graduate to the ground-up table, primarily because of the technologies that are available to us. And you're going to learn a little bit about this from our speakers tonight. So it's important for us, as citizens, as members of our community, to understand the important role that science plays in our daily activities. So the last thing I want to share with you before I introduce our first speaker is that we felt that reactivating big ideas this year would be an important thing for us to do, because this year the Institute becomes 25 years old, a quarter century, which is really, really incredible to think about. And we're very proud of that because this started as an idea that many predicted would fail. This kind of science, this kind of foundational research is best done on the coasts where there's already pre-established infrastructure and institutions that will allow that science to flourish. So many people call Jim and Virginia out of their mind, in fact, crazy, for trying to set up an institution like this in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's great to know that after 25 years, we can say with great authority that that experiment actually worked. So I'm very, very pleased to be able to say that to you. So we believe really that the future of science is going to be shaped by minds from all walks of life, with different perspectives, with different ideas, and anything that we can do to cultivate those environments are going to be a boon for our ability to improve our understanding of life. So one of those minds that is doing some of this work is represented by Dr. Paco Calvo, who is your first speaker tonight. And Paco Calvo is a real philosopher, okay? He actually studied philosophy for an undergrad, got a Ph.D. in philosophy, and as you know, Ph.D. stands for Doctor of Philosophy, so he really is a doctor in philosophy, okay? But he's very interested in cognition, and his questions about cognition led them to ultimately believe that it is possible for not just animals, but all organisms in the tree of life to manifest or show some type of cognition. So Paco is the founder, one of the founder or the founding director of the Minimal Intelligence Laboratory at the University of Murcia in Spain, where he's been really exercising or carrying out a lot of the experiments that he's doing, trying to understand how is it that plants process stimuli and adapt and develop activities that will sound funny to you, but they learn, they adapt, and they may even have intelligence. And that's one of the topics that Paco is going to talk to us today. So, Paco, with no further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the stage, and thank you very much for being here.
Well. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay? Well, it's great to be here, Alejandro and everyone, and thanks for having me and all of you for being here. It's really wonderful. It's just being here for just less than 24 hours. I arrived yesterday evening, and it's been amazing, very concentrated, very dense, and full of excitement, right? So yeah, well, I mean, if biology sits at the kids' table, I wonder where philosophy is, right? Better not to think about that too much, right? Anyway, well, I mean, big ideas. I don't know how big this idea is, but I was crossing the pond to come here, and I thought, okay, let's try this idea on you today. Like, I'm gonna ask you to do something. It's a little bit challenging, okay, but we can do it. I'm gonna ask you to focus, to concentrate a lot, because it's not easy. You're gonna be seeing some geometric figures, like triangles, circles, straight lines, a few things, okay? So the challenge is I want you to watch the clip as what it is. That is simply geometric figures, okay? So try hard not to see anything other than triangles, circles, or straight lines. See what I mean? Okay, there we go. Try hard. Okay. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hand if you succeeded, because I know no one did. Right? Did you, young man on the audience? Tried? Okay. You did your best. Okay. You see, I mean, I bet no one was able to. Doesn't matter how hard you try. You simply cannot help it to project your narratives, your human-centric narratives. So we build up, we make up this story, and we're chasing each other, and then all this fight, and then we team up against the, mean circle, and right? So there is no way you can just watch geometric figures shifting around the screen. We cannot possibly do it, okay? It's part of our nature. So there is nothing we can do about it, and that's okay. We need to live with that fact, right? Now, the point is that in a sense, doesn't allow us to put in the shoes of other species, right? Now, think about it. If we can't even see a triangle as what it is, a triangle, how are you going to put yourself in the shoes of a fellow organism from a different kingdom, right? So even have neurons, don't even have neurons, have their own interests. So we care about our interests, and it's so incredibly difficult to put ourselves in their shoes, no matter how hard we try, okay? But we have a great tool, we talk about that today, which is education, right? Now, I'm sure most of you have watched this tech talk. I mean, Sir Ken Robinson gave this talk on, about schools killing creativity, right? Las escuelas matan la creatividad, we say in Spanish. And actually, he did say to his audience like things like, hey, what do you reckon is the right age to embark in a PhD dissertation? When would you go and write a PhD thesis? And people would go like, hey, I mean, I might need to, do a couple of masters, and I need to do this, and then I need to know some chemistry, and then I need to know some maths and whatever. So it's never the right time. You can always postpone it because there is something else. You need some gap you need to fill before you feel you are ready to go for that, right? And then Sir Ken Robinson said, no, hold on a sec, we are getting things wrong. I mean, the right time might be when you are 3-4 years old, just before primary school. So before we put in your head all this fixed schema that won't let you think outside the box, that won't allow you to think different, right? So once we get in school and start to memorize and regurgitate, acquire knowledge as it comes printed in the textbooks, it might be too late, right? So the sooner the better, if you understand it. I mean, of course, we are talking metaphorically. Now, this actually happened. I mean, I was walking by the kitchen with my daughter. She studied biotechnology, but this was prior to that. She was still in secondary school, and this is the type of textbook she had to prepare an exam. So, okay, this is a chapter in a psychology textbook for secondary school kids. So I got like formas no humanas de inteligencia. So non-human forms of intelligence, animal intelligence and artificial intelligence, right? See what I mean? This is what the textbook tells you. It doesn't allow you to think outside the box. It's already telling you, listing the types of intelligence that can be there for you to appreciate. It doesn't let you appreciate things outside what's agreed upon by mainstream orthodox science, right? So it's so difficult to think outside the box when the educational system does a disservice by telling you explicitly what you are allowed to think or not, right? In fact, this is funny because it happens to be with my students. They laugh so much at Ptolemy. Oh my God, how could he think that the Earth was at the center and the sun and everything revolving around the Earth? I mean, how could they think that, right? And then, of course, we know, Copernican revolution, blah, blah, blah. Now, one thing we don't realize is that at the time of Ptolemy, of course, they weren't seeing Earth from a picture taken from outer space like we do, like the blue marble floating around. We've been educated into seeing the Earth from the outside. Now, you've got to picture yourself, to put yourself in the shoes of these people a few centuries ago, thinking, hey, how do we account for these things happening, right? Above our heads, right? In the sky. And it was a great model, in fact. And what's more important, kids, primary school kids or secondary school kids in Ptolemy's time, they could pass a test. If they had to prepare an exam for the next day, they could go to their Ptolemy textbook and learn that the Earth sits at the center, regurgitate it the day of the exam, and get an A+, get the best degree possible because they were actually parroting what they had been told in the textbook, right? So my question is, what will people, our grandchildren, be laughing at in 100 years' time? So picture yourself in like the 2126 or 2125, right? 100 years from now. And what will these guys be saying? Can you believe what we thought in 2025? Oh my God, it's hilarious, right? So that's what we should be thinking. that we are going to be the Ptolemies of future generations, right? And that's my song. It's if those of you who got a copy, you will, if you browse it, you'll see this drawing in the book, because I didn't want to bias him. That's very important. So I didn't want to bias. He said, "Hey, Paquillo," Paquillo is little Francis, little Paco, no? Paquillo said, "Can you draw, like, at the beginning the book was meant to be, the title was Plant Cognition: The Next Revolution, right?" Then my publisher had the better idea, but at the time that was the working title, and then I didn't want to bias him. So I said, just draw plant intelligence. Off you go. And of course, that's what he did. He couldn't help it. He wasn't being, he just came naturally. What else are you gonna do? You're a kid, okay? Yeah, sure. Let's do an exam, right? So that's what that plant intelligence boils down to from our perspective. Remember, we are the Ptolemies of the future generations, right? So actually, in the preface of Planta Sapiens, there are so many centrisms, like we are human-centric, animal-centric, neurocentric. Oh, you have no neurons, sorry, no, you cannot be, you've got to have neurons. We are neocortex-centric. Oh, you don't have a neocortex? Oh, poor you. No, sorry. So like this, we are falling prey of all these, tunnel vision, bias attitudes. I just had to go for a navel gazing. So this is navel gazing, right? It's far too many things. So what do you reach out for help when you are navel gazing, right? Of course, that's what I did. So I went out for help, and we had this gathering in Dharamsala with His Holiness. And they told us, yeah, you just bring a copy, whoever, all the scientists, the Western scientists. So we were all there queuing with our copies. And then here I came and said, as I told him, right? I told him, plants are sentient. No? Plants are sentient. They have subjective awareness, right? By the way, I forgot to mention, there is a couple of plants around. You may want to pass them around if you have them. I want to be thinking right now about that, right? About what is it like to be this guy sitting here right now. So this very guy, okay? What is it like to be, not plants in general, but what is it like to be, you, right? These very plants here and now. What is it that matters to them, right? So I assume for some reason that the Dalai Lama would be, right? So I could say, hey, plants are sentient. So what do you reckon his response was? Right? Sure, right? I mean, he has that, right? So we might think he's able to think different, right? To think outside the box, not to be as constrained by Western thought as we might be, right? Well, that's what you think, okay? You know what he said? He said, no way. No, like this. I was like, oh, no way. Only animals can feel. You know why? Navel gazing. He gave us a book of his, and I was reading his book on the flyback, right? And I was like, oh, I came across this passage. And then, oh, now I understand why he said that. Locomotion is the name of the game. You see navel gazing? Not neurons, neocortex, humans, animals, even locomotion. Oh, you don't walk on two legs? Sorry, right? So we just can't help it to think that we provide the gold standard. Somehow, we can't help it, right? So even the Dalai Lama was unable to truly think different outside the box or outside the pot, right? And yet, we know plants are constantly, non-stop doing their things. Maybe, remember, what is it like to be you?
Of all the woodland plants, this is one of the most aggressive. It waves its shoots agitatedly from side to side, as if feeling for the best way forward. And when a shoot settles on its course, it thrusts ahead relentlessly. The invading stem's backward-pointing spines give it the grip it needs to climb over almost anything that stands in its way. It can advance as much as 3 inches in a day. Before long,
right? You got the idea, right? It's too long, not really need worth it, right? But you know, 3 inches a day. So they are not that slow. We just need to be patient. So we need to be patient and you know, chill out, slow down, and watch plant life at plant space, right? This is time-lapse footage. But even if you watch them to the naked eye, you wouldn't imagine how much you can see. You just need to realize that one thing is your scale of observation, the temporal scale at which you are able to, you know, to do your investigation, your research, and the temporal scale at which their behavior unfolds. And those two don't quite match. So either we speed them up and do time-lapse photography, or you slow yourself down and sit on a stool and watch your plant grow, right? You would be surprised how much you can see to the naked eye. Darwin was able to see a lot to the naked eye, right? He couldn't time-lapse, and yet he was able to see way more than we do actually nowadays. I tell my students, look, this is not about having the money to buy the gadget, the best toy that you can get on the market. It's because if you don't have the frame of mind, the right frame of mind, you're gonna miss it. You're gonna miss the plot, right? So it's about the attitude, okay? We need to rethink root and branch the way we approach them. That's what we do in our lab. And to the extent that, look, we took one day a Venus flytrap, that like this one, or the one you have circulating around, and we took it to the vet school, right? And you see, this is where they anesthetize your cat, your dog, your cow, your horse, right? And this is isoflurane. So the molecule you use to anesthetize animals in the vet, right? And, you know, be able to operate them safely, right? Because they don't suffer, they are not feeling anything, right? So they thought I was pulling their leg. They thought, oh, what are you talking about? This is like, where is the camera, right? So I said, no, please, do you have isoflurane? Can I put my Venus flytrap here? Of course, I cannot just use the dosifier that they use. I need to put a glass bell, a cotton pad soaked with anesthetics inside, and then it will absorb through the leaves, the anesthetic. And this is not a spoiler. This is at the very beginning of the book. In the preface, I start with the idea of putting a plant to sleep with anesthetic, right? So to me, this is amazing because it tells us a lot about what is it that we all share. I mean, life as such can be put to sleep, right? With the same molecule, I mean, right? So look at the mimosa. This mimosa here is like those. Now this one is kind of folded because it's stressed. It's been moved around quite a lot. So it's not like nicely opened up. But look at these ones, nicely opened up, right? So check this one at the top. This is what you would get. Of course, no time-lapse needed, right? So, you know, mimosa, you touch it, it falls to the naked eye, right? You see how nicely it does it? Now, what happens when you anesthetize it? Check bottom left, right? Now, this one has been anesthetized, and look, nothing, okay? Now, what happens when your plant goes back to normal? After the anesthetic wears off, you touch it, and it starts to fall, if only kind of more slow. It's like dazed. It's like, oh, what happened, right? So, see what I mean? So, it is easy. Or people might pay attention to the fact that we can put it to sleep. And that's not that interesting. It is interesting, but it's not that exciting. Because after all, this is just a matter of action potentials. So when you touch it, it fires an action potential, right? Spike. And that's what happens with neural tissue. Neurons do the same. And it has to do with ions crossing the membrane of the cell, right? So it's a flow of ions. So effectively, the anesthetic is simply messing up the membrane properties such that those ions can't cross the membrane, right? So this is an animal neuronal action potential. This is a plant one. They are simply different channels, different temporal scale, different resting potential, different levels, different ions, different everything, but the profile is the same. So the actual spike, the depolarizing, repolarizing, hyperpolarizing, what it does, right? That pattern of shooting, right? The spike. So that's what we are sharing. And of course, it's not big news that then we can think that the molecule is affecting tissue, neuronal and non-neuronal tissue alike equally, right? Now, to me, the most interesting question, let's think different, is, hey, what does it mean to come out of anesthesia? Think about it. So it's not the fact that you can be anesthetized, but what does it mean to come out of anesthesia? What is it that you are recovering when you go back to normal? right? So you could feel, now you don't, now you go back to normal, you feel again, you recover something that you had lost temporarily. Why don't we say, when a plant comes out of anesthesia, this one, why don't we say that the same thing is happening to it that to the dog or your cat? When it at last, hey, are you okay, my little pet? Why don't we say that in the case of the plant? Because of this navel-gazing attitude. Oh, they have no neurons, they don't walk, they don't do this, they don't do that. We are the gold standard, they don't resemble me, they cannot be doing all these things. You see? But in fact, the question is legitimate. We are more interested about the questions we are being able to raise rather than the answers we might provide. Because I might be wrong, but the very point at stake is the fact that we are able to raise the question. Now, it's a question worth pondering around. It's like to say, hey, what does it mean to come out of anesthesia? Then we can discuss the possible answers. But can we at least consider the very question, right? And now, in the case of plants, it's funny because they can provide inspiration for many walks of life. If we mention chemistry, maths, physics, well, we can talk about robotics and AI, right? So we had a project a few years ago on inspiration for robotics and AI. So think about it. So if you are, you're this rover cruising on Mars on wheels, and then you would need to get to this place, right? So I'm on wheels, I'm the rover, so I need to reach to point B and then see, doing sampling the terrain, checking out what's going on there, drilling and getting a sample, whatever. Then what's the headache you have if you are an engineer at NASA or Jet Propulsion Lab? You say, hey, I don't want mess to, I want things to go okay. So watch out for the crack. You don't want the wheel to get stuck in the crack. Oh, watch out, there is a cliff, or there is a sand dune, or there is, this 30 degrees, or all these problems that you can encounter. And you need to deal with them. And that's a huge headache because anything could go wrong and something will go wrong. Murphy's Law, right? So what happens here? That sometimes you can either say, hey, I'm going to try to compute my way out of the problem. I'm going to think hard of all the possibilities of everything that could go wrong. And I'm going to code that. And then I'm going to say, hey, if this, then do that. If this, then do that. If endless list. Don't do that. You need your rover to be autonomous, to be doing its own thing, right? So you cannot pretend from here to say, hey, right? So how do you achieve this? Well, sometimes it requires that you truly think outside the box, that you are truly thinking differently. And then you say, hey, okay, good, I need to get there, but I don't need to locomote, to walk to get there, or go on wheels. I can grow. So you see what it means? It means that if I grow, I can reach my target at point B without leaving point A. I'm in both places at the same time because I'm growing, as you saw in David Attenborough's BBC documentary. So that is one solution. And we can find inspiration in plants to do that, to design robots that are able to do that, right? So think of, this is a wild type of rice, the roots. And then you have a mutant here that cannot circumnutate. So circumnutation is like the movement of the tips. They oscillate, they do like this, like nodding, and then they move around like this. That's what you saw in the video, in the documentary. It's like, that's how it was looking for the host tree. That's the same with roots. So if you have a root that is able to do that, you see, it's exploring. This one cannot nutate, cannot circumnutate, it's just growing in circles, running in circles. This one is dumb, this one is intelligent. You see the pattern of exploration? So for that pattern of exploration, you don't need to worry about anything other than letting it grow. It will find its way because it will grow over its problems, right? So that will allow you to do something like this. You can actually build a growbot, a growing robot, a robot that grows, right? So you can have a robot that grows with pneumatic actuation. You can inflate it like a balloon. So you can actually inflate it and it will reach its goal, right? So you're going to see a robot that does that while circumnutating, right? Nodding, like oscillating, right? Doing this thing. And the other one that doesn't. And now you'll see the difference, right? So this one is circumnutating, is making this pattern of lateral oscillatory behavior. And it's actually, navigating the surroundings, avoiding obstacles. This other robot gets stuck as soon as it's find an obstacle, right? So you see, what we'll find here is that the intelligent behavior is the emergent result of interactions that take place in between the tip of the robot and the local environment. So you don't need to be computing the solution out. You need to simply think of what types of morphologies, anatomies, bodies, behaviors allows the system to interact with the surroundings in such a way that the solution comes out all by itself, right? So you see, this is plant inspiration for robotics and AI, right? We have far too many questions we could be asking. I mean, could take ages, because literally any problem that we encounter in science, in life, we can approach it from a different angle by thinking, hey, how about if we remove ourselves from the picture? Because one of the messages to me in Planta Sapiens is to say, we are not that special. We are not that special. We're just another solution, one more strategy, evolution found, right? But they have different problems. They come out with different solutions, right? So sometimes we can be thinking, hey, why don't we give it some thought as to how other forms of life might approach, might encounter, might face their different problems they might have. And that will give you plenty of inspiration to think differently. In your robotics, in your AI, but in your daily life, in many, many other things. For example, when I told you to slow down and watch nature at nature's pace, not your own pace, hectic paces we live nowadays, right? So one more thing to finish up with, it's, you know, Orson Welles, Citizen Kane, you will remember this film, there was like a before and after. Like it was a revolution. So Citizen Kane was truly revolutionary. It was like the soundtrack, the script, the camera movements, the everything. So literally, right? So what happens here? That Orson Welles was 25, just 25. And it was his first movie coming from theater, right? So how the heck did this guy was able to do all this? I mean, did he have encyclopedic knowledge of the history of cinema to precisely know what was missing? Hey, this has been tried out, this has been done. Okay, this is what hasn't been done yet. This is the movie I'm gonna make, right? That's what the BBC journalist asked him 20 years later, right? In the 60s, he said, hey, to Orson Welles, you're a genius, right? You were just 25, you were able to do this, and how come? I mean, you knew everything, that you were so young, your first movie, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like looking at him saying, what are you talking about? You know what his answer was? I was able to do this because of the freedom of ignorance. I didn't know this couldn't be done. And that is the way it got done. He wasn't aware it couldn't be done, right? So that's what I invite you all to think in those terms. And sometimes we might know too much. And sometimes being the experts in the room, you might think that you are in a privileged vantage point of view and say, hey, that I am the expert, I know the problem space, you listen to me. And sometimes it's ignorance what gets you there, right? Sidney Brenner said something similar, one of the fathers of today's molecular biology, right? He said something like, no, what moves things is the power of ignorance. Something like Orson Welles, the freedom of ignorance, the power of ignorance, because he was saying, hey, sometimes if you know too much, if you are too close to your problem, you don't get to ask other questions. You don't get to say, hey, have you tried, or did you think of, no, you don't do those questions because those are silly questions, right? Remember, what will people laugh at in 100 years' time? So I hope we can all try to think different, to think outside the box, and make a change, a shift in those textbooks for the future generations. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paco. And yeah, it's not often that you get to hear a different perspective on something that we see every day, like plants, for example. Although winter, you know, but it gives me also great pleasure to introduce our next speaker tonight. Her name is Dr. Kate Biberdorf. She's a professor at Notre Dame University, but she's also the host of a podcast that the Stars Institute and KCR Studios have been producing for the last 2 seasons called Seeking a Scientist. And Kate brings to science communication an element of joy and surprise that It's really, really engaging. And it's a really fantastic way to communicate very complex ideas in such a direct fashion that people immediately have an affinity for what is being discussed. And Kate, by the way, interviewed Paco for one of the podcasts. So I would encourage you to take some time, if you haven't already, to listen to that podcast. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to welcome and ask you to please help me welcome Kate Biberdorf to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Hi, can you hear me? Yes. So I feel like I need to warn you, before I met Paco, I had 0 houseplants and now I have over 30. And I make my husband text me pictures of them when I'm on the road. So just be warned, this book really is going to open your mind if you have it. So thank you very much for coming tonight. I am so excited to be here. I love Kansas City. I am not happy that I brought the snow with me from Indiana, so I apologize for that. I was going to tell you a little bit about my work, but I figured like a 19-second video would be better. Okay. So I'm a science entertainer. I try to make science fun. And so I get to take Paco's amazing research, Alejandro's amazing research, and then try to translate it for the general audience. And so when I refer to myself as a science entertainer or a science communicator, I have kind of 3 or 4 different buckets that lands in. First one is I'm an author. So I've written 7 different children's books. So the first 2 were nonfiction books. They each have 25 hands-on experiments that you can do with materials in like your craft drawer. And then I have a 5-book fiction series. It's about a little 10-year-old Kate the chemist who goes around her neighborhood and uses science to solve her everyday problems. I wrote that book for my sister. My aunt and uncle are in the audience, so I'm just going to give a little inside baseball there. But I actually wrote those books for my sister. And so she was someone who was intimidated by science. She didn't want to take stuff apart and put it back together. So when I was writing these books, it was really important to me to write a fiction series to hopefully grab the kids that are intimidated by science, get them hooked on it a little bit. And then at the very end of the book, I have a hands-on experiment that the characters in the book use to save the day. So hopefully if they didn't like the science that much when they first started reading it, by the time they're at the end of the book, they're like, okay, I'll try it. I'll try one experiment. So that's my way to like kind of nudge in their world and open it up a little bit. But then when I talk about this afterwards, the adults come and walk up to me and they're like, what about me? And I was like, ugh, fine, I'll write a book for you too. And so I wrote it's elemental, the hidden chemistry and everything. And I basically just talk about my favorite examples of science. So starting with breakfast all the way down to date night. But that's how I kind of do science communication in the written world. I also do the podcast, Seeking a Scientist. Thank you, Stowers, because I love hosting that. I fought tooth and nail for that position. So I'm so happy that they hired me. I love this job because I get to talk to all of the nerds that I wouldn't usually be able to talk to. So I get to read it, right? I mean, it's the best thing ever. So I get to read their books and then write down 50 pages of questions and then book 1 hour of their time and ask as many questions as possible and hear them explain their science, use as many clips as I can from what they said, and then try to add a little bit of flair and fun to it. So we lean into pop culture references. We try to use things from SNL or things that Colbert have said, just whoever, just something little funny little blips that we can use to try to make it accessible, because we want science to be fun and we want people to believe that anybody can be a scientist. You just have to have a passion and want to go after it. Okay, the last thing is usually what I'm known for is I blow stuff up on TV. Truly. I'm going to name drop on you for a second. So I've been on Today's Show a number of times, Colbert, NBC Nightly News, Kelly Clarkson, Rachel Ray, Wendy Williams, Nick Cannon, Neil deGrasse Tyson, The Talk, you name it, I've probably been there. And what I love about that is I get to go on TV, do something simple. Like, so in this example with Kelly, who by the way is awesome. If you're a Kelly fan, she's exactly who you want her to be. She sang next to me one time while I was doing science. It was like a dream come true. It was amazing. But anyway, so we do a little science experiment and I try to slip in 1 or 2 like science facts within the segment. I'm not there as a professor. I'm not there to teach. I'm there to have fun. But if I can like sneak in a couple little nuggets, a couple little facts, that's the goal with those segments. But that's what brought me to Notre Dame in December 2023. I did a lecture just kind of as for fun. I was working at University of Texas at the time. At 10 p.m. at night, I got an email saying the dean wants to talk to you. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I in trouble with the dean at a different university that I don't even work at? How did that happen? But he had this idea. He wanted to propose a brand new role that had never taken place at the United States before. So I am the very first professor in the United States for this role. It's called Professor for the Public Understanding of Science. So I am a professor of science communication. So the entire role is to go out there, talk to different people, talk to different scientists, unlike Paco, unlike Alejandro, ones that struggle to communicate their science, meet with them, have conversations, and then I say, hey, this is how I would talk about your science. Like, how do you feel about that? And then I give them that paperwork back so they have that information so they can then communicate with the audience. Because what happens with professors and scientists is we get caught in what's called the jargon jungle, and we use all these vocabulary words that are amazing and they're perfect when we're talking to other scientists. But when we're talking to the general public, it's usually not the best thing for us to be doing. So I just try to kind of coach what I've learned along the way as my role of Kate the Chemist. But at the end of the day, honestly, like if we're being really honest, my goal is to inspire young girls. I want to get young girls excited about science. I want them to know that you don't have to be a boy to be a scientist. You can wear your red bottom heels and you can use a blowtorch. Like you can have as much fun as you want and you can still be a scientist. So at the end of the day, when I'm exhausted and I haven't had enough Diet Coke, this is what I come back to. This is what I'm trying to change. Like this graph just like punches me in the stomach. So we have had 653 Nobel Prizes in science. I have been tracking this data since about 2014. It's been at 3.9% women forever until last year where it dropped to 3.8%. So one day I'm going to say 4% and it's going to feel so good. But if I could say 5 or 6%, that would be awesome too. So this is why I'm motivated. This is truly why I'm trying to get other people to be good science communicators, because the more people we have out there, the more people you can see it, then you can be it. We can inspire the next generation and hopefully make this world a better place. So I'm going to kind of echo exactly what Paco's been saying. Open your mind. Everything is theoretically impossible until it's done. So let's just try to have fun tonight and think about science from a different point of view. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm done. But what I'm going to do now is bring both gentlemen up, Paco first, and we're going to ask a couple questions, and then we're going to open it up for you all so you can ask them some questions too. Okay? So thank you. Come on up here, Paco. Okay, so shameless plug. He was on Seeking a Scientist, episode 10, Our Plants Intelligent. It's a really good one. I love it. So I want to start off by asking you just about your experience. What was it like being?
Do you want me to tell the experience?
Yeah. Do you like being able to be a science communicator and share your love with audiences?
No, I loved it. I mean, the experience itself, I must say, I really enjoyed it. Now, I've got to say that this didn't come naturally to me. So it's been a process of learning, this public thing, communicating science. It's not that easy, absolutely. I mean, this jargon issue you mentioned, that's a big issue. But to me, at least my experience in the case of doing the podcast and other podcasts I've done and this sort of event has to do with being able to do something that I cannot do at other gatherings. Like, for example, I mean, if you're thinking of publishing scientific articles, you get to provide the answers, right? So you don't get to talk about the problems. You get to talk about the results. You report discoveries, findings, results, but you don't get to talk in a conference or in a academic setting about the uncertainties, the miseries, the ignorance, the things you don't quite understand, the questions you want to raise. So this podcast format allows me to try, that other thing, to say, hey, I'm really interested in saying, hey, how about we change the question? How about we ask this and not that? How about we think of plants from a cognitive science perspective and think of them as we spoke, like what does it mean to come out of anesthesia? Do you have subjective experiences? What is it like to be you, right? We couldn't be raising those issues in other formats. So this podcasting, that gave me the opportunity to reach out in that different way, right?
You did a great job too.
Right, thanks.
It was really interesting to be able to bounce some different ideas off of you, which I love. So I always think of being a science communicator as kind of being like an athlete. You have to train, but everybody can do it, because I get pushed back a lot, but everybody can do it. It's like being an athlete. You have to train, you have to practice, build that muscle, and get better at it. So I want to put you on the spot. In your field, what is the hardest piece? What is the biggest challenge about this topic specifically for the audience that don't study plants? Like, what is the hardest piece about communicating your work?
Right. No, I see. Okay. So to me, I mean, in the case of Planta Sapiens, it was my first popular book. I mean, I was like, raised as an academic, thinking of academic writing and that sort of thing, right? So it wasn't easy, but I learned something where I wasn't expecting to learn. Because sometimes you have the feeling that writing for the general public and popular science writing, it's about sesamizing it, like, Sesame Street discourse, like making it that simple, such that anyone can follow it. And it's not about that, I realized. So it's even better. It's like in the process of sesamizing what you have to say, you are forcing yourself to truly understand it, right? It's not simply, I want you to understand what I'm trying to say. It's that in doing that, in that type of effort, I'm getting out of this comfort zone of over-exploiting this jargon that, your pals, they know what I mean. I don't need to make it more clear because you know what I'm talking about. And then you hide yourself in those little technical jargon. And then sometimes you realize that you didn't truly understand it. So only once you sesamize it, you write it for the popular audience, then you are truly understanding it, right? So that gave me that insight. I haven't thought about that. So my idea at the beginning was like, hey, I need to write this, like, I used to say, for my neighbor next door, so to speak. And then I realized that I could engage my neighbor next door as part and parcel of the scientific process. Because doing science is so important that we understand that it's not just reading the science. It's society. I mean, it's a human activity. And as such, we require that type of feedback. Because we forget, for example, the role of imagination. So science, it's not just testing a scientific hypothesis. It's not following the ABC of the scientific method. It has a lot to do with imagination, the power of imagination, right? So am I able to figure, to convey, to visualize a different working hypothesis, right? That is what you can get to do by sharing in this other format, this scientific knowledge.
You were the first person to introduce me to that phrase, sesame streeting. I'd never heard that before. Right. And so I just was like, okay, I can kind of wrap my head around that. But honestly, you do a really good job. I flew through that book. Y'all are not gonna be able to put it down. Okay, so Alejandro, come on. come. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I kind of want to ask you the same question about science communication. So do you like it? Do you find it challenging? Where do you land on that spectrum?
Well, I mean, it is a challenging thing to do because you really do want to convey, your excitement, your joy, your ability to see things that others have not seen before. And so for me, the way I see it is that scientists, we really have a profound responsibility to share with people something that people have never seen before. So when we make a discovery, it's the first time it's happened. And all of a sudden, whether you're a student or you're a postdoc or you're an investigator, it's on your shoulders. How do I communicate this discovery such that as many people can understand it and as many people can enjoy and partake in the significance of making a discovery, even if it's just minute in the large scale of things. So that's really the fun part. It's just difficult to do. That's all. But it's really the fun part.
It takes practice.
It does take practice.
It takes practice, but I'm grateful that you both embrace it and you're both working on that muscle. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to the fireside Q&A part. So there's been 2 pre-submitted questions that I'm going to read, one for each of you, and then we're opening it up to y'all. So get ready. If you have questions, get ready to think about or get ready to present them. Okay, Paco, you're first. So in your book, Planta Sapiens, you pose the question, are plants intelligent? And then you examine what it means for something to be considered intelligent. When did you start blurring the lines between philosophy and science? And what intrigues you about pushing these boundaries?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because we usually think as if, this type of thing like, hey, are you a biologist? Are you a chemist? Are you a philosopher? Right? So we tend to think that we have these borderlines, and we either do conceptual analysis or theoretical work or semantic analysis, and then, or you do the experimental, the empirical part of it, right? And it's funny because when I started working in plant intelligence, as a straight philosopher at the beginning, before founding the lab, I was putting up the paradigm, the theoretical approach, and clearly there was something missing. And it's that, hey, you cannot do that as if you first do this and then you do the other part, right? So I like to think the philosopher as working with the scientist in the lab and simultaneously tackle the issue at both the experimental and the conceptual fronts. There is no other way you can do it. You cannot split, divide, and this doesn't work. Divide and conquer doesn't work here. You have to be doing both because they are providing feedback to each other. So you cannot do it unless you close the loop. And then when I founded the lab and we started, well, that's a long story about how that happened, because I was used to, bother these fellow friends like plant scientists. I would, catch a plane, go to Germany, wherever, UK, say, hey, to a colleague, hey, why don't you try doing this on your plant learning experiments? Why don't you do this? Then once he said, a colleague of mine said, hey, why don't you do it yourself? Yeah. And I realized that I needed that push.
Yeah.
I thought I was the philosopher of plant science, and I couldn't be doing that. And I'm so grateful to this push because I realized that I was flying back home so excited, thrilled, thinking, oh, that's true. And then I realized that I needed to do it myself. Not simply because he wasn't going to give me a hand, he was busy, but because it was the only way in which I could be raising the questions nobody was raising. Like, in the end, it boils down to saying, hey, people ask me, hey, how come you were able to found a lab, experimental lab in a philosophy department? And then I said, no, it's not that I can do it despite being a philosopher. It's that what I'm doing in the biology department or in the psychology department is not being done. So it's not that I can also do it here. It's that I can only do it here by putting those two ends together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, such a strong argument. Hopefully it wasn't too hard for you to
It took some time.
Yeah. I can assume there'd be a little bit of resistance to that.
Yeah.
But, all right, Alejandro, you're next. So one of the many things I admire about you is your ability to foster a community for scientists to approach the way they solve life's mysteries differently, mainly by asking insightful questions like, are plants intelligent? So what qualities do you look for when deciding when science is pursued here at Stowers? And why is it important to ask big questions and produce big ideas?
Wow, whoever put that question out there, that's a great question.
Sorry.
At least try the first one. It's how we choose scientists is actually a very simple premise, and Paco actually referred to it. Science makes progress when, as Paco said, you think out of the pot, right? So what you want to do is that you want to surround yourself with people who force you to think about your science differently. We are so prone to become comfortable in the familiarity of what we understand that we fool ourselves into thinking that we don't need to understand anything else. That we now know everything we need, and the rest we need to do now is just dot the I's and cross the T's, and we're done. Until somebody shows up and asks you a question that completely reshapes the way you're thinking about your own science. So our hope is that, when we bring scientists to join the Institute, it's that they're going to participate in those kinds of exercises. And that's why our place is so diverse, that we can have in the same room somebody who is actually working in protein folding, and somebody who's working in neuroscience, and somebody who's working on stem cells or in neurobiology or what have you. Those minds will actually collide, and those collisions usually are very productive because they'll reveal some aspects of your problem that you would not be able to see on your own. And so that's the kind of person that we look for, and that type of attribute that we look for in scientists when we're trying to bring them to the Institute. Now, big questions, and why do?
Yes, yeah. Why is it important to ask big questions and produce big ideas?
Yeah, mostly because we're not immortal. We have a limited time on this planet, right? So why waste time in small questions? It makes no sense unless you're fully forced to only ask small questions. Then go ahead and ask them. But when you're given the freedom or to pursue ideas like we have here at the Stowers Institute, you can ask more questions in a lot of other places. It's in really good hands. So come here and ask big questions because your time is limited. So I think it's really, really important for us to try to do that. Because just in the process of doing it, you'll actually reveal so much about the natural world that is invisible to us. Paco gave a really good idea with Ptolemy and Copernicus. And he said that Darwin was able to see more than other people of his time. And I was commenting to Paco earlier today that that's exactly what's going on, is that, you know, it's not that natural selection and the evolution of the species was invented by Darwin. It's not that the heliocentric theory of the solar system was invented by Copernicus. Those things were there. They were invisible to everybody else, but not to them, right? So when you ask big questions, that veil of invisibility is lifted. And you can see things that were there, but nobody else has seen them before. So I think it's really, really important for us to make an effort to ask big questions. It's not just those scientists, it's all of us. It's all of us.
I have like 8 questions. But I'm not allowed. Okay, so I have to open it up to you all right now. Do we have any people out here who have questions or big questions? All right, I saw your hand go up here, right here in the middle. Give a second. We've got a couple of people with microphones, so let's pass it down just so we can all hear it. And then if you don't mind, will you introduce yourself? What's your name?
Certainly. My name is Lauren Hill. I have a question for Paco, and it is, when you began the exploration into plant intelligence, did you find it starting to change your own personal ethical structure with your discoveries?
Absolutely. It took some time though, right? Because we have all these, inertias, like inertias, not like inercies, like momentum, right? Right. So it's like, so it takes some time. It's not easy, but it's true. It's true that it has given me a lot of food for thought of things that I was taking for granted, or that I never thought about, like things as simple as what you do with your subjects once you've run an experiment, right? So because we are not asked to sign any ethical, little paper that you do when you work on animal models, right? They don't ask you to do that, not even with fruit flies, right? You've got to be something else, right? And to have those concerns. And then you just don't give it a thought, right? You just, okay, what do? You just trash it, right? Now, that gave me a lot of food for thought, because I'm truly taking seriously the idea of the subjective awareness and the agency of non-neural organisms, right? And when that happens, you need to rethink your whole schema, root and branch, right? And then I say, hey, for example, what do I do now is we finish an experiment, say we've been time-lapsing 20 subjects, then I send an email to the faculty list and say, hey, we have, these individuals, these agents, non-neural agents, for you to adopt. We have, the good news is that in Murcia, we have good weather, so they can pick them at the lab and then take them home and transplant them into their orchard or the balcony or in pot, whatever, right? So, but it is true that sometimes you kid about it, you joke about it, and hey, how funny. And it's not a joke, you think seriously about it.
Who's next?
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
let's see right here.
For Paco, back in the 1960s, I read of an experiment where they put electrodes from an electroencephalogram onto, I believe it was a tomato. So they're getting a readout. They shove a nail into the tomato. There was an immediate response by the tomato to having a nail shoved in it. Do you do any EEG experiments on your plants?
Yes, thanks for the question. We do, actually. We call it phytoacupuncture because we use acupuncture needles as electrodes, right? But there is a good reason to do it, right? So we do plant electrophysiology. We record register the electrical activity, the signals flowing throughout the plant body. And the reason to do that is that we might be obsessed with checking out their behavior, their overt behavior, as it unfolds, at least through time-lapse footage, right? I can be watching a clip and I see what the plant is doing, right? But sometimes many things might be going on despite lack of apparent overt behavior, right? Well, the same as with humans or animals, right? I can be sitting here and you might think, hey, nothing is going on. Well, check out, I mean, do some neuroimaging. You might be surprised what's going on, or maybe you might be surprised flat line, right? You might be surprised how flat it can go, right? So here, for example, we are doing now some experiments. I was talking about those experiments earlier today on jet lag, right? So as crossing the pond, like I did, I can bring a potted plant and cross the pond, and then I can ask whether my plant is jet lagged, as you are, right? And you know, we can see that in legumes, we can study the behavioral studies on how they fold their leaves when the sun sets and how they unfold them when the sun rises in the morning, right? So we do that. But then we can think, oh, can I induce a form of jet lag to the plant, right? Can I induce it by shifting the photoperiod? So I can change when the sun sets and when the sun rises. I can shift it, right? And fool the plant into thinking so I can make it cross the pond. So that might not be conspicuous to the naked eye or not through footage. I can be looking at the plant and the plant might be doing nothing really interesting, might be still doing its normal folding. That doesn't mean that the plant might not be stressed by shifting the photoperiod. And we might find that out through electrophysiology. So doing electrophysiological studies allows you to peek through a different window into the inner world of the plant beyond their overt behavior.
I don't want to give anything away, but if you read his book, you'll hear a little bit more about that. Okay, how about over here? Right here? Say your name for me.
Hi, my name is Saul. My question is, I'm really fascinated by science communication, and I would like to get a career in that, hopefully one day, but I'm not sure what the career path is supposed to look like.
Who are you asking?
That's for you,
Yeah.
Kate. That's for you.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
your question.
You can do whatever you want with science communication. Truly, you absolutely can. So it's what are your strengths? So do you like to write? Do you like to talk? Right? Do you like to jump up and down on TV and blow stuff up? Right? There are so many different avenues. So I would first ask yourself, what is your favorite way of communicating with anyone, right? How do you like to express yourself? And how can you find your voice? Because that is the most important part in science communication. What are you going to care about the most? What are you going to zero in on? For me, it's chemistry, right? And what I love with the podcast is I get to step back and talk to not just chemists. I also get to talk to biologists because we never get to that low table over there, right? So you can do whatever you want with it, but you need to figure out what your voice is. You need to figure out what your angle is, and you absolutely can have a lucrative career with that. Like, I'm not going to tell you TikTok money's there, but you can have fun with it. So just figure out what you're good at and how you want to communicate, but you've got to find a voice. Like, so are you going to be talking about misinformation? Is that your angle? Are you just sharing the joy of really neat science things? Are you going to share a fact a day? What is your shtick, basically? So that's the hardest piece, is figuring out what your angle and your voice is, but you can do it. Just figure out what your voice is. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Not really.
Okay, okay.
That's your department.
All right, let's see here, maybe someone from the middle section here. We've got purple hair. I mean, I can't ignore that. So we've got right here down here. Thank you. Say your name for me, please.
Hi, my name is Nina Butler. And I have a question for both of you, or all of you. I've always just been mesmerized by the fact that plants can turn what we qualify as humans as nothing, air, soil, and water and sunlight, into resources to grow. So the first part of the question is, are there technologies that are looking towards providing that resource to humans, and possibly finding ways to splice our genes together? And then my next question is, how, like, philosophically and psychologically, do you think that would impact people to go from us constantly fighting over resources and resource allocation to being able to make our own resources?
To be able to make our own?
Our own resources.
Right.
Mhm.
You want to go first?
So elegantly proposed. So I'll take a stab at that. So, that's the kind of things that initially sound like, a crazy idea, something that, could be laughed at, et cetera, et cetera. But that's usually how all great ideas start. And you know, I'm not kidding when I say that nature already is doing some of that. There are organisms out there that actually generate their own resources, and they're animals. And what do? They actually bring into their anatomy some kind of algae or some type of cytochrome. So while they're animals and they eat, if there's a period of starvation, they'll actually use sunlight to generate the carbon necessary for them to make their resources and survive. So if animals can do it, based on just becoming, you know, capable of, like, you know, just taking air, as you said, light and whatever is in the water to survive, there's no reason to think that us humans cannot do it. And so imagine a situation, for example, where you could wear a subdermal patch of chlorophyll, for example, or some crazy stuff like that, right? And then instead of going out there to get tan, you're just generating sugar that you can actually use to, like, you know, these ideas are not crazy. I mean, they're science fiction, but, you know, the science fiction of the 20s is the science of the 60s. And the science fiction of the 60s is already the science of the 2000s. What's the science fiction of today going to be in 50 years? We don't know. But these things are really possible. And so I like this quote from Richard Feynman, that he likes to say that there are at least, you know, two types of impossible. The first kind of impossible is what is really impossible, which is 1 + 1 = 3. That's never going to happen. But there's a second type of impossible, which was the last quote that Paco gave us, which is that it's the kind of thing that people thought impossible until it was done. Flying was impossible. Going to the moon was impossible. These things were impossible for a really, really long time. And now we just take them as part of our reality. So who is to say that with the technology that we have accrued to the present time, that we might not be able to find solutions that are, if not an approximation, you know, a demonstration of what you just suggested.
Now, if I may add, yeah, no, yeah, I can hear you. And yet there is something like, I mean, we should be thinking bold without apology, right? We don't need to excuse ourselves for thinking bold, but we need to be doing that, right? And it's true that we can find in nature, in the history of evolution, we can find, you know, many bags of tricks that nature has tried, you know, throughout the years, millions of years. And many things have worked, others has been dropped. And, you know, there's nothing set in stone as to how things will unfold in the future. That's for sure. Now, on the other hand, it's also true that if we have the capacity, the intellectual capacity to be that bold and to be so courageous in the type of technologies we can envisage, or we might do things we cannot even envisage as of today, and our grandchildren will, right? If we have that capacity, maybe we should also have the capacity to rethink what's in our hands as of today, without waiting for those technological advancements to take place, right? So, like, for example, a very silly example is the very idea of talking about resources. You know, in environmental studies, our textbooks of today speak of resources. And we only think of, hey, how should we be exploiting our resources? In which way? But we don't question the very label of calling this a resource. It is not a resource. It's not an object to be exploited this way or this other way. It's a subject, an agent, right? In the business of meaning making its own ways, right? So this means that in a sense, we can also be rethinking what sort of shortcuts we could take as of today, right? And these two paths could follow in harmony, like simultaneously. It doesn't need to be one or the other, right?
I mean, just like what you've been talking about with the robots on Mars, right? It's a complete combination. We need the robot, example. And then we also need the plant that can actually grow and extend it. Yeah, amazing. Who's next? All right, I think we're over here. Waving your hand, go ahead. Right behind you.
So I'm trying to think of the big idea of saving humanity and how this might apply to connections or interactions between the intelligence, group interactions. So for plants, how might plant intelligence interact? Say they cooperate or fight to save their ecosystem or to destroy their ecosystem, and what applications, what meaning might that have for us humans as we fight or cooperate?
Yeah, well, there are many
sources of inspiration. I mean, we can inspire many, many things in the plant world, right? Right. For one thing, the very idea of cooperation, the plant world, we shouldn't forget that the individual is not the plant itself; it's the collectivity. But I don't even mean the plant collectivity. I mean all the symbiotic relations they engage in, like with mycorrhizal networks, fungi, bacteria. So I like to speak to remind ourselves that we are not the agents as such. We are holobiomes made of many different agents. Think of your microbiota in your gut, right? I mean, if you remove it from me, there is no more Paco, right? It's part of me. It's not something I carry with me. It's part of me, right? So when you think in those terms, I think we need to rethink what we mean by collective intelligence, because this is the emergent result of how all these sub-agencies interact with each other, right? And that can give you, it can suggest different ways out, because those ways out, going back to the idea of resources or not resources, have to do with the idea that we, Homo sapiens, are not the ones at the driving seat doing the driving. We are just one more passenger in a relation that should be more horizontal, right? So it's the hierarchy that misses the plot. And that might give you a different source of inspiration.
Wait. Who's next? All right here, go ahead.
Hi, I am Gopal. My question is to Paco. As you mentioned that being a human, we are thinking from a human perspective or in a human-centric. My question is, means for your book, why did you title Planta Sapiens, which is kind of more human-centric rather than something else?
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. In fact, well, even the very name of the lab, Minimal Intelligence Laboratory, someone told me once, hey, why minimal intelligence? Their intelligence is full-fledged, it's their intelligence. Why do you call it minimal? And then I told him, no, minimal intelligence, I meant ours. In not appreciating theirs, right? Now, going to Sapiens, Planta Sapiens, it is true that it's taken from Homo sapiens, but at the same time, it gives us some reason to think a little bit, to mull over what we are taking for granted. So sometimes people read it along those lines and say, hey, you're trying to inflate plants, beef them up into humans. And what I'm trying to say is, no, we kill two birds with one stone, which is like, we get to understand plants, plant intelligence for what it is, what matters to them, what is it like to be a plant, how can I truly put myself in their shoes. And at the same time, I can get as an extra lessons the capacity to rethink what we meant by human intelligence. Maybe it's not what we thought it consisted of, right? So rather than inflating plant intelligence, what I'm doing is deflating human intelligence. And in the process of doing that, we find the middle ground in which the label sapiens applies to any form of life whatsoever, right? So what I'm truly after is the sapiens that resides in the tree of life as such. What unites us all despite diversity, right?
So since you brought up the book, if I may, is there anything that didn't make it into the book that you had to cut out for any number of reasons that you wish you were able to add?
Oh my God, what a question. What a question. Well, I had to stop at some point because I was gonna go crazy, right? Because as I was telling you before, the project was way longer than I initially thought, right? So it was really hard to get to really jot this down, right? This idea of sesamizing which topics to cover. And it's true, one thing that really gave me headaches and didn't know how to cover it was this idea, because sometimes people think that my worry is the skeptical attitude, like from mainstream orthodox plant physiology, like what people might tell you, the reductionist or mechanistic approach, hey, Paco, plant physiology explains it all. You don't need to be talking about intelligence or anything. This is physiology, right? And that skeptical attitude is okay. We need it. Science needs that push, and we need to feel that kick and then to try to counter and put on the table good arguments. But to me, the worry was not that skeptical attitude, but the attitude of those who are eager to buy your message before you explain why you think plants are intelligent. So I needed to say, hey, hold on. I mean, I don't want you to believe it because you want to. I want you to believe it because you understand the science behind it and what it amounts to, right? So to me, that's where I had to stop at some point and say, no, I need to just, in the preface, I think I mentioned something like that, right? This is addressed for these two types of readers, right? The skeptics and the sympathizers, the killjoys and the romantics. But I don't want you to romanticize it. I want you to understand it and then say, hey, critically, intellectually speaking, say, okay, I can buy this message or this more food for thought than I hope to find or whatever. The other thing that I had to leave aside, I wouldn't find the space in the book, was to discuss the type of experiments that in the history of science have not worked. Because we have a confirmation publication bias. So we publish positive results. We say, hey, this works, I publish it. This doesn't work, under the carpet. And that's a big issue. That's a big issue because we don't get to understand. I mean, science is not built by reporting what did work. We need to understand what didn't work, right? So science is both the positive and the negative. And here I need to steer my way into which sort of research literature I can flag. This is worth reading. This is worth checking out, as opposed to the rest of the literature that we couldn't really find a place for it in the book, right? At some point, you've got to make it your compromise, right? How much you can,
It's tough.
It's not easy.
It's not
Anything
easy.
but easy.
When I was writing my book, I feel like half of the book is still on the cutting room floor.
Absolutely.
Like you just cut,
Absolutely.
and all of them are your little baby stories, and it just breaks your heart.
In a sense, that's what a good editor does, right?
Yes.
So I had my agent, and both the agent and the editor were, so like they said, Paco, drop it. And then that reminded me when I was in San Diego in the 90s writing up my PhD thesis. And I called this strategy, it worked really well, the chapter dropping strategy. So I had all this material left, right? I was, oh my God, all these months left, I still have to jump down 3 more chapters. And then I said, oh, I can drop them. So you realize sometimes that less is more. And I'm not kidding. It's sometimes like you get a better structure if you are able to sacrifice your beloved babies.
So hard though.
Yeah, still.
It's very difficult. But I think you did a really good job about presenting to the reader, like, think twice about this. Like, don't just take what I'm saying, like actually think about this. And my husband was on the romantic side and I was the killjoy side.
Right.
I know, I told you this. Like, I was so hung up on the fact that plants don't have a brain. Like, that's not the definition. And you like, stop it, Kate. And that was really helpful.
Right.
We had a lot of fun dinner conversations
right.
about your book. So get ready. All right, who's next? All the way over here. Give me just a second to get a microphone. Oh, wait. Okay, we've got one over here. You'll be next after that. So let's go ahead, Joe. Yep.
This one's for Dr. Kate.
Oh, hi.
What inspired you to choose Nobel Prize as your metric for progress? And what are the other metrics that you might celebrate that feel like leading indicators that we're on the right track?
Oh my gosh. So that is just one that just bugs me. There's just something about it that just eats me up, and I have a hard time with it. And when we go through a week where we don't have a single female receiving a Nobel Prize, those really get to me. And so right now, that's a marker that I'm personally just kind of tracking. But things that I love is when I've presented for a K through 5 school, so an elementary school, and then all of a sudden they're in my classroom as a college freshman, and we get to talk about chemistry, and now they're into science, and they want to be a doctor because of my show, which is not true. They're just giving me lip service. They want the A. But, those conversations to me are really, really meaningful. And you can see the fact that the needle's changing. I didn't go into this, but at Oxford, they started that position that I just took at Notre Dame. They started that in 1995, right? And so they gave that to Richard Dawkins. This position's been around for 30 plus years. But so now, just now, 2024, we brought this position across the pond to the United States. So there is movement. We do see the fact that people are embracing science. We're talking more about science. And if you look around a little bit, we're not all looking like Bill Nye. we all have a little bit of a different vibe these days, and I love that. And so I think if we all can just keep presenting our authentic self, we can inspire the next generation, and we're just going to see our community grow, and it will be a more diverse community, which we all know if we come from different backgrounds, we think about things differently, and that really challenges us to end up with a better product. So I personally get inspired by more women being in the field. That's a metric that's very easy to follow. So. But still, we can work on the Nobel Prize one. Not giving up on that. Okay, I promised someone over here. Go ahead, and what's your name?
Hi, I'm Martha. I'm an American Century employee, so this is really amazing to attend events like this. And Alejandro, I think when you do the town halls, that you're a brilliant science communicator, and both the other two are. I listened to the podcast, a few episodes, and this has just been really great tonight. My first question is around communication. So I feel like I was really excited about science as a kid, but like philosophy and history, I didn't really get into later in life. So my question for Paco is if he finds it harder to communicate science to the public or philosophy to the public. And then the second question I have is just your thoughts on like CRISPR technology in plants and like all these different things going on with like the ability to store data in plants or like plant furniture I've seen. There's a documentary I watched on Netflix that covered some of these things, but yeah, what your thoughts are on that. So two-part question, but yes, thank you so much for having this event tonight and allowing us to be here. Shankar is right here, also an American Century employee, a lot higher up than I am, so.
Thanks. Yeah, well, you know what? I have never pictured myself now on hindsight. I never seen myself as either giving talks for lay audiences on philosophy or on science. So I don't think of this divide as I raise issues or I talk about plant intelligence, and sometimes I'm telling you about an experiment we are running in the lab. But in the end, you are going back to the questions, the philosophical questions. What does it mean to have a mind? What does it mean for a vine? We time-lapse vines, and they are reaching for a pole. And then I might say, hey, what does it mean to behave intentionally, right? So I think we are tackling them at the same time, both the theoretical, the philosophical, the conceptual, and the empirical, the experimental. So if I wouldn't think of having given talks on those two issues separately, and when I do them combine, I think they are equally difficult to convey, to share, right? Because we, different walks of life, different backgrounds, different intuitions, and sometimes we are, over-interpreting data, or sometimes, oh no, I know what you mean by intentional behavior. I know what you mean by being an agent. So sometimes you have to go back and, a few steps and say, no, but philosophically speaking, this is what we meant. And then scientifically speaking, this is the problem with this control in this design. So you struggle in both fronts to walk your audience through the details, right? But yeah, it's difficult for me to split it apart and find myself on with one hat or another hat. I try to carry both hats at the same time, right? Now, with respect to the second question, there is so much stuff going on in engineering, agricultural engineering, genetics, and many things we try on plants. And what bothers me is that every single breaking news I check out, on my inbox, like, these alerts, then it's always, scientists have discovered that blah, 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 and then we spend a few lines to talking about what you have found out, and then boom, off you go to the application for. This will be used for, we can then improve yield, improve the taste of your wine, get you higher, whatever, right? So it's anything you do is always oriented towards satisfying our needs as consumers. And that bothers me because all this technology, all this engineering could be put to the service of understanding plant life for itself and in itself. So one thing that really bothers me is to think, hey, if we could only come back to Earth as, extraterrestrial scientists that have just landed here a few million years ago, so before Homo sapiens existed. And we were checking out these guys, right, as alien scientists. And I go there to this planet Earth where we cannot possibly provide the gold standard. How would I look at them? I couldn't simply say, hey, are they agent insofar as I am because they resemble me? So I'm not here to be the gold standard. So we would be looking at that differently. And yet we might have the technology, the engineering, the genetics engineering to say, hey, what things we could be done, but in this case, not towards the satisfaction of our needs, but to understand them better in themselves and for themselves. So that's to me the pending task.
I love that we brought up aliens there. So we still have that. All right, I was given so we have to go to our last question here, and it's pre-submitted. I apologize.
Oh, no.
So this is for both of you. So Alejandro, we'll have you go first. What is one thing you wish the general public understood about science?
Oh. I mean, Paco said earlier, it is a human activity, which means that science and scientists are part and parcel of all of us, right? So I think what people really need to appreciate is that scientists don't do science because they got permission to do science. Scientists are doing science because, like all of us, they're curious, and they just happen to find themselves in an environment where their curiosity can be exercised freely for the purpose of doing science. So understanding that scientists don't live in an ivory tower, that they, understanding that the scientists have kids that go to the same schools that your kids go to, that they pay taxes like all of you, that, they're not really removed from society as much as they're portrayed. So I think it's a great thing for people to understand that, like everything else, it's a human activity, and that it's open. It's open for anybody who has some curiosity that they want to satisfy. And if you look around, you will find somebody who will probably have an answer to your questions, and it should be approached. So don't be afraid of science is what I'm trying to say. Okay, don't be afraid of science. Embrace it, not blindly, like Paco is saying. Embrace it by asking questions and understanding it. And you don't need to ask permission to do science or to ask a scientific question. You should just ask it, and somebody will probably hear your call and come and have a discussion with you, which I guarantee you're going to enjoy very much. So.
Good luck following that, Paco. Go ahead.
Oh, come on. Oh, the same question.
Same question. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I was waiting for the question.
I'm sorry, I could reread it. So what is one thing you wish the general public understood about science? Like,
Yeah.
have a pet
No,
peeve?
yeah. So to me, what I truly think we should all understand, in fact, I tell this up to my philosophy of science students, right, a lot, that science, when we say it's done by humans, it means that it's done by humans as any other human activity, and this means with its virtues and its miseries. So it's nothing privileged or above the rest of the human activities, what we do. If you do pottery and have some clay and do a jar or whatever, and you do science, you are doing something else. You are producing something as well, right? And that means that we need to understand that science shouldn't be this, cartoon version that we have of science that, objective. Something that, we can truly naively think that, hey, yeah, that's something that they can truly be objective in their pursuit of truth. No, we have to be doing it in their subjectivity as a human activity. We cannot but be subjective, right? So sometimes we mentioned that before about, the type of glasses that you wear, right? So you cannot pretend not to be wearing a pair of glasses. So you see the world through some glasses, either plant-centric, if I'm obsessed with plants, or human-centric, or whatever. But you wear some glasses. You don't see the world objectively. It's always been done like any other activity, right? The only problem, I would like people to understand, is that the only problem is that in doing science, we simply need to make explicit, to be aware of which glasses we are wearing in each moment, right? So that is the real science we are doing. A subjective enterprise that needs to be understood in those terms. So to understand what's truly amazing about science is not to think of science as an ideal activity, which is perfect. No, it's perfect that it is done by humans in the way we do it, right? And that's the real science that is good to understand because it's the science that then we can all do and we can all feel engaged in. So lay people, not just can they ask questions that we as scientists can respond, is that their way of approaching the problem can allow you to think hypotheses that you might not have thought otherwise. And that's why this connection through the popularization of science is so important because we are closing the loop, right? In that sense.
If you have a question, then you are a scientist.
That's
Point blank period. So I think we can end on that.
That's a
Yes.
good way to put it.
Yeah. So please join me in thanking Kate and Paco for the presence here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I want to thank all of you on behalf of the Institute and all of its scientists for coming here out tonight to spend some time with us discussing these topics. And I also would like to invite you to a reception, which is followed at the Great Hall down the stairs. So please feel free to join us there. Paco and Kate will be around if you have more questions for them. And thank you very much again for being here. Greatly appreciate it.